Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are on theme 1, session 5, true and valid. As I said, we could devise an infinite number of definitions of truth, but how do you know if your definition of truth is any good? That's pretty important to know how to test this. Ask yourself this question. Can your definition of truth build an electrical generator that successfully generates electrical energy? Can your definition of truth result in the discovery of microscopic bacteria? Would you say if a definition of truth could lead to that, then that might be a useful definition of truth? One that builds tape recorders, rocket engines, electric clocks. Finally, would your definition of truth enable you to build solutions to the social problems, poverty, war, riots, inflation, vandalism? I will demonstrate there is only one concept of truth that will enable us to ultimately obsolete the international hostility that leads to war and to practically all other problems. And that's the same definition. True means that which is observable. Up to this point of time, prior to Columbus, the concept has not been successfully applied to the social structure to solve our problems. I think one of the most amazing things about Aristotle's statement that heavy objects fall faster than light objects is not so much that Aristotle was wrong. Everyone can be wrong. The most amazing thing that for 2,000 years no one ever tested Aristotle's generalization of falling bodies. No one single test by any single so-called scientists. No one. 2,000 years, no one tested. Finally, 2,000 years later, Galileo dropped a cannonball and a light shot from the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And guess what happened? They landed at the same time. Galileo repeated the experiment over and over and over again. In fact, Galileo repeated this experiment in front of most of the students and faculty at the University of Pisa. And the learned faculty were so overwhelmed. They were so impressed with the major discovery of Galileo that Galileo was forced to leave the university. Another illustration of how deeply rooted is intellectual dishonesty. Do you think dishonesty ended with the times of Galileo? Or now we have it tenfold? I wanted to say tripled, but decided to say tenfold because that's closer to the truth. When freedom is finally achieved, ladies and gentlemen, where everybody has 100% control over his own property, when this is finally achieved, people will look back with even greater amazement. And they will ask this question: why did it take 6,000 years for man to discover that you cannot solve a single problem with physical force? Why did it take 6,000 years to discover that you cannot help a man by stealing his property? And you know what the answer will be? Nobody tried it. However, the ones that discover it will be forced out of universities. When we do try it, you will find out it works. It will be observable by all senses. It will be observable by all senses. When one man can push a button and wipe out 100 million people, or we can do this through other means I haven't even discussed, like bacteria warfare, which is even a greater threat than thermonuclear warfare, to the species, I mean, and they're improving this technology all the time, then freedom must be a goal, because freedom is the only hope humanity has to survive. Let's come back to our discussion of the absolute standard of rightness. In the physical science, it is what both true and valid. And if it is, therefore, time to discuss the concept of validity. I will begin with a quotation from French mathematician Henri Poincaré, who said, "A science is built up of facts in the same way that house built up of bricks. But a mere accumulation of facts does not constitute a science any more than a pile of bricks constitute a house." All right, what does that mean? Of what value is a pile of bricks? A pile of bricks has real value when it's organized in some rational way. The form could be a brick wall, a brick chimney, side of a building. Prior to that, it has only potential value. The same thing applies to facts. You can have a pile of facts, but it's not science. It's organized knowledge that makes a science. Science is actually defined as the totality of organized knowledge. This brings us to the second component of rightness in the physical sciences, called validity. Validity refers essentially to a mental process by which one arrives at a conclusion. Now, logic itself is a large subject. There are thousands of books written on the subject. I will come to the grand test for the validity relatively soon. Today I'm going to give you a sketchy, simplified view of validity. Let's look at a syllogism. We would like to find out if the conclusion is valid. We might have a syllogism that has a first premise, second premise, and a conclusion. First premise says, let's test it for validity. At the beginning of the 20th century, all students in Princeton were men. The second premise: John was at that time a student in Princeton, therefore, John is a man. Is it a valid syllogism? Is the third process valid? Yes. Does it flow from the premises? Yes. Yes and yes. It's a valid syllogism. Let's look at a second syllogism. Test it again for validity. All people who graduated from college are always right. Smith graduated from college, therefore Smith is always right. Is this a valid syllogism? Does this follow? Does logic stand? Yes, this is a valid syllogism. When you're testing for validity, you always assume that the premises are true. Whether the premises are true or not is irrelevant if we are testing only for validity. Now let's talk about conclusion. When all the premises are true, and in addition the third process is valid, then the conclusion will be right. When all the premises are true, and in addition the thought process is valid, then the conclusion will be right. Let's now test the first syllogism for rightness. We already determined that it is valid. Now, what we must do? Go back and test the premises for what? Truth. The first premise is all students at the beginning of the 20th century at Princeton were men. Is that true? Yes. So we see that their first premise is true. Again, second premise, John was a student in Princeton. We check the record. John was enrolled at the specified time frame. Now, the first premise is true, the second premise is true, the conclusion is valid, logic verified. Therefore, the conclusion must be right. Right? And it is right. It satisfies the ground rule. Now, test the second syllogism. We have already determined that it is valid. Now we must test the premises to see if they are true. All people who graduated from college are always right. Is that true? No, that's not true. I will define false as not true. The second premise, Smith graduated from college? True. We checked the records. Smith did graduate. But it flunks the ground rule since the first premise is false. I hope it's clear too so far. Let's stop here and continue next time. Until then.